There are going to be over 500 actions today around the country in response to a call to shut it down for Palestine. Last week, we saw the biggest march for Palestine in U.S. history, but we can't go down to D.C. every week. Some people can't make it. So now the organizers have called on people to organize demonstrations in their own localities, at their workplaces, at their institutions, and are calling on people to do whatever they can to stop business as usual. Right now, we're at the BlackRock headquarters in New York City. It's about 8:30, and we've been tipped off that there's going to be a disruption inside.
An $8.6 trillion investment company, one of the largest asset managers in the world. BlackRock has billion-dollar investments in the top 5 weapons manufacturers in the world. Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. And those bombs, those weapons, have killed this incredibly long list that now actually must be longer because there are over 10,000 Palestinians dead in just 1 month. There is no excuse for anyone to be going about their business as usual when their offices are paying for the slaughter of children, men, women who have done nothing except demand their right to resist brutal occupation.
On the other side of town, students at Fort Hamilton High School were preparing to walk out in solidarity with Palestine.
We looked at the toolkit that was provided with us and we decided 11:30 would be like probably the best time. And then I decided that I really wanted to make it bigger, so I spread it to the clubs. And
there's supposed to be a national walkout today.
Yeah,
people aren't supposed to be going to their jobs. Students are supposed to be walking out of schools. It's not just our school. It's supposed to be a national thing. So
that's how we
first heard of it, and then we brought it to our school.
Honestly, we were handing out posters and lunch. We were just trying to get as many people to help on as we could.
We were getting everyone who had Instagram, anyone who had any sort of social media to just like post about it so that we can get as many people to come 11:30, like 6th period.
When the conflict with Ukraine happened, our school was so supportive. We had posters all over the hallways.
People were able to talk about it.
People were able to talk about it,
and we had charity. But suddenly, when we want to raise money for people in Gaza, for children in Gaza, they're villainized. It's a religious issue. We're going to offend the other side.
Just because I'm not from Palestine, just because I'm not from the region, does not mean I can't show my support for it. You won't find any of the true answers, any of the real experiences from people there in Western media. You need to look elsewhere.
Some of the high schools that didn't walk out spent their lunches phone banking Congress. Over at the Columbia School of Social Work, students were holding a sit-in in solidarity with Palestine.
Yesterday, we held a 9-hour sit-in at the School of Social Work where we were threatened with sanctions. And today, we're here because it is part of the Shut It Down for Palestine movement that's happening all across the world today. And we are here because we are going to do a die-in. Currently, the School of Social Work uses a prop framework, which is power, race, oppression, and privilege, where we learn about decolonizing social work, which we think is hypocritical when we are being silenced on Palestine, which is a colonized place.
Students from across the city were gathering at Bryant Park for a rally, but while they were doing that, I went over to the New York Times headquarters where media workers were planning disruption in the lobby.
I'm in the New York Times headquarters right now, and protesters have just read out the names of journalists murdered by Israel, and now they're reading from these newspapers with the names of thousands of Gazans that have been murdered in the last month by Israel. And as you can see behind me, they are completely occupying the lobby, and they're also joined by protesters outside that are supporting them.
During the disruption, we spoke to one of the organizers, Ari Brostoff, a senior editor at Jewish Currents magazine.
When we see the newspaper of record doing an abysmal job at their own job, then we as their colleagues have to stand up and say that.
Eventually, the police were called, but the protesters kept reading names anyway.
The NYPD Strategic Response Group is behind me. They're the arrest teams of the NYPD. And the protesters here have been reading off the names of Gazans killed by Israel, starting with the youngest. And right now, 45 minutes in, they're at 4-year-olds.
While all this was happening, the march at Bryant Park had grown to well over 10,000 protesters and was headed to the New York Times headquarters. By the time they reached the New York Times building, the anger was palpable.
Shame on you!
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
This was probably the most active day of protests in New York City since the beginning of Israel's massacre, but it doesn't even begin to capture the full scope of November 9th. Actions were held in every major city across the country. There was a protest at Debbie Stabenow's office in Detroit, a walkout at the University of Georgia, a picket in front of Textron, a military contractor in Providence, a protest outside of Congressman Deborah Ross's office in Raleigh, walkouts in Pittsburgh, a walkout in Tucson, the complete shutdown of the federal building in San Francisco. Activists in D.C. surrounded the State Department. Boston crashed a fundraiser for Kamala Harris. New Jersey occupied Cory Booker's office. Healthcare workers in Philly had a die-in at City Hall. Cleveland shut it down. Denver shut the state capitol building down. Atlanta had an overnight sit-in at the Israeli consulate. Veterans occupied congressional offices. One of Senator Elizabeth Warren's constituents, who's lost family in Gaza, confronted her while she was at dinner. Code Pink even disrupted Joe Biden, and that was just the US. Internationally, there were actions in Italy, Morocco, El Salvador, Canada, Japan. In total, there were 600 actions that took place worldwide in one day. In the last few weeks, I've heard a lot of people say they feel powerless to do anything about Israel's massacre. But nothing could be further from the truth. Israel's war machine relies entirely on a litany of institutions outside of its borders. It relies on banks and financial institutions that invest in it. It relies on media outlets echoing its lies. It relies on politicians that rubber stamp and unconditionally support its crimes. It relies on universities and schools that lie to their students about the situation. It even relies on restaurants and coffee shops and actors and musicians to give it cultural cover to make people think people actually support it. In other words, it relies on us. It relies on institutions we patronize, institutions we work for, and we can withdraw our support whenever we want. We can even stop them from functioning whenever we want. After all, how can a university continue to support Israel if all of its students support Palestine and won't go to class or won't pay tuition until the university supports Palestine? How can a media organization continue to function if its reputation is synonymous with genocide denial and parroting war propaganda? How could a politician hope to get reelected if they get heckled and mocked and laughed out of every room they step in? And that's what this Global Day of Action shows, that this is all actually completely in our hands, and that when we all act together on the same day, in the same coordinated fashion, our fear melts away, and the things we once thought were impossible no longer seem so far away. In many ways, it feels like this latest Israeli massacre has actually awoken a sleeping giant. The November 9th call to action was issued to disrupt business as usual, and another day of action is already being planned for November 17th. The question of what happens next is no longer just in the hands of governments. The question of what happens next won't be decided for us by some outside force. What happens next depends entirely on us, and whether or not we finally decide that we've had enough with business as usual.